Hi there, my name is Matthew, aka EZBOT, and today I'm going to show you how to use the Elektron Syntakt. The Elektron Syntakt is a 12-track drum computer and synthesizer. It's kind of a hybrid of the model cycles and the analog rhythm stuffed into the digi format, so kind of the best of all worlds. I'm going to show you how to use this device by taking you through building a pattern from scratch. This is not going to be a video manual of any sort or a mega tutorial, but rather I'm going to go over most of the features I think are the most important for you to get started using the Syntakt so you can make music right away. Alright, so to get started what we're going to need to do is create a new project. Go ahead and hit this gear looking icon, hit yes on project, select load project, and then choose create new. We don't need to save before loading, let the changes be lost because you're probably coming from the preset patterns which you can't save anyway. So after it's initialized a project, hit no. That's how you leave menus. All right, now we're in a new project. Let's have a listen to the sounds that come with a new project because you're going to need to get familiar with these. They're going to greet you every time you start a new pattern or a new project. Cool, so what you heard was 8 digital engines and 4 analog engines. So let's talk about that for a second. So this top row here, these are your digital engines, and you can load any digital machine into these engines. All of them are the same. You just do whatever you want with them. You can load a MIDI engine into those tracks as well, and you could turn this device into a 12-track MIDI sequencer if you wanted, or an 8-track MIDI sequencer, or whatever. You decide. These bottom 4 tracks down here, these are your analog tracks. So these 3 can be any of the analog engines except for the engines that are available on track 12, which are the analog symbol engines. You'll only find them on track 12. So what I like to do when I start a new project is change the pattern scaling. It's the first thing I do when I start any new project, so this won't be any different. Hold function, select page, and this brings you into your pattern scaling. So what I want to do is change this to per track scaling. That way I can have every one of these engines have their own pattern scale. So it could be like 13 steps long, 64 steps on some, 5 on another, do whatever I want, create polyrhythms, all sorts of cool stuff. So there's an advantage to it for sure. So I'm going to hold function and hit yes, and that's going to activate per track mode. And now I'm going to hold function and turn the H encoder, and that's going to change my master length. And I'm going to change it to 64 and or 4 bars. Holding function and turning the encoder lets you move in larger steps. So depending on what parameter you're changing, it might move in steps of 4 or 2 or 1 or 16. In this case, it's 16. I'm going to leave it at 16 steps currently, and I'll adjust these as I move to different tracks and make a decision when I get there. Hit no to leave that. So now I'm going to go over to track 1. This is our bass drum modern. So this is a digital kick drum. It sounds great. Here's an analog kick drum. Also sounds really good. Sounds, just like the analog rhythm. But I'm going to go back over to this digital kick drum because I really like it. And I'm going to go into the step sequencer mode here. So hitting this circle button or record button takes you into your sequencer. And I can place down kicks, and this tutorial is going to be simple. The music I'm going to make is simple. I'm not trying to blow my brain out or explode your mind or anything. I just want to show you how to use this device. So we're going to keep things pretty basic. So I'm going to put 4 on the floor so that we have a nice rhythm or a nice metronome feeling without having to listen to the click of a metronome. Cool. So there's our kick drum 4 on the floor pattern. I can hold track and select another track. Here's an analog snare that I'm skipping over to and just putting that down on the basic 5 and 13. Now what I can do is place down another trig here. And now I can use what is called a Trig Condition. So I can make this snare only trigger on its 2nd run, 3rd run, 4th run, or a random chance that it triggers, or it only triggers if another thing doesn't trigger or does trigger. There's a lot of trig conditions. Right now we're just going to use the 2 of 2 conditional trig. I'm going to hold this down, go into my trig menu, and I'm going to select, you can see as I'm scrolling through this that there's many options, 2 of 2. What this means is that it's going to pass over this trigger one time, and then it's going to trigger it the second time it passes. So on 2 of 2. Awesome, right? So another thing I like to do is create snare rolls on here. So I could just put down like 4 triggers, hold them all, and then go to fill, and to to activate your fill condition is the page button right here. But you also have to be out of your sequencer mode to activate that fill condition. So I'm gonna copy all four. So I'm gonna hold all four of these steps and hit the record button. That's your copy button. And then I'm gonna hold this step down and hit paste, and it pasted all four steps. So you gotta be careful that you wouldn't paste over the triggers that you don't wanna be pasted over. You could just copy it one by one, like I'll do right here, and just paste these in. These steps are not going to trigger until I activate the fill condition. Okay, so let's add some hi-hats. I'm gonna hold track and select 4 because it brings up the alloy or engine, so kind of a percussive metallic engine, perfect for hi-hats, and that's kind of the sound it makes on its own. So I'll put like a couple hats down just so we can get an idea. Here's the parameters for it. Look at that little guy. Pretty familiar sound if you owned a model Cycles. So I want to make these hats ratchet a little bit. I'm going to hold down one of these triggers and press the up button. This brings me into the retrig menu. There's a few ways to do retrigger on the Syntakt. This is the way that is able to be done on most of the Elektron boxes, but there's a special way you can do it on here that you can't do on the other boxes. We'll get into that in a moment. It's pretty cool. But right now we're just gonna do this, so I'm gonna have it be like, I don't know, some interesting rhythm, and I'm gonna take the velocity down to 128. This means at the end of my roll that it will roll into silence, which is pretty useful. So the length is at 1/16, so we'll play for just one trigger. Let's make the length a little bit longer. I'm sorry, not one trigger, one step. You also have to activate it by turning your A encoder. That turns it on, that's what that 1 means. So I could copy that. And this one chokes that, so that's a pretty cool effect. Nice. Now let's add some melodic stuff. I'm going to hold track and select the dual VCO. Okay, so the way that I want to put the notes in with my bass line, because that's what we're going to do, we're going to put a bass line in using this analog synth engine, is using the keyboard. So I want to be able to play it in. I'm gonna hold function and hit track, and it brings up my chromatic keyboard. Now, there's something really cool with the Syntakt you're not gonna find on any other box quite yet, and that is the new keyboard. And hopefully they bring this to all the other boxes because it's awesome. So hold function and push down on track, and that brings in this keyboard mode. So here I'm able to select scales for my keyboard. Right now it's on chromatic, but I can change it to Ionian, so all the white keys. Dorian. Cool, there's a bunch. Look at all these scales. A lot of them I have no idea what they are. Okay, but we're gonna use Dorian because I like how it sounds. And we can leave the root note on C5, but we can adjust the root note for our scale, and it shows you all the scales, which is great because it kind of teaches you a little bit about music theory. So we'll leave it on C, just make things easy for us. And then talk about this one other feature. That is keyboard folds. So I turn this H encoder here, and boom, we have 2 octaves of quantized notes for our keyboard. This is incredible. Now if I want to move the octave of my keyboard, I can use the up and down arrows here. But check this out. It's awesome. Super great for putting in melodic stuff. I mean, it's just gonna make making music on this thing a breeze. So let's take advantage of it. I'm gonna hold record and hit play to go into live record mode. And now I can just play in some random notes and then we'll fix them up. Okay, so I got some notes in there, they sound fine. I'd need to adjust their timing in my sequence because I played a little off. So I'm gonna go out of the keyboard mode, so function plus track to leave the keyboard mode. And I'm gonna press the record button to look at the sequence, and here's what I recorded in. Sounds pretty messy, so I can either quantize it or I can do some microtiming to it. If I hold down a trigger and use the left or right arrow, it brings up microtiming. So here I can adjust the timing of this trigger in my timeline by tiny amounts. So I could create my own swing if I want, just for tiny parts of a sequence, or I can just move stuff around to make some weird feeling to my beat. But there's another way to deal with this, and that is holding function and hitting the trig menu and going into your quantize menu. So here I can just turn up quantization for my track. At 127, it's going to completely bring all my triggers on the grid. Now it sounds just fine. Bring it down to like 50, and now it's like a little humanized, so closer to perfect, less machine sounding, and a little bit more realistic. Let's make it machine sounding. So this global setting over here is going to quantize all of my tracks, but I just want to quantize this one. Cool. Now, if I want to adjust the filter parameter of this bassline, and I believe I do because it's not being filtered at all, I can go into my filter section here, and I have a couple analog filters to choose from because we're on an analog engine right now. So we have, there's a lot of them. So there's a low pass, band pass, high pass, notch, low pass slope, a peak filter, a high pass slope, and an off filter, my favorite kind. Let's go back over to the low pass. So I'm gonna turn down the frequency a little bit with my E encoder and bring up the resonance a little bit with my F encoder. I'm gonna send a little bit of positive modulation with my envelope. And now I'm gonna change the decay of the envelope here. Let's live record this envelope being adjusted. Hold record, hit play. Cool, I like that. Let's go into our synth parameter and play with a couple of these configurations for this dual oscillator. This is the balance between the two oscillators. Analog overdrive. Super cool. So this is barely scratching the surface so far. We're gonna keep going though. Okay, so we have our bass line playing. Sounds pretty nice. Let's add some more sounds to our sequence. Let's go over to the Chord engine, which by default is on track 6. So this might be familiar to you if you had a model cycles. So you can adjust the quality of your chord with the E encoder here, and then the balance of your chord here. So this is a wavetable synth. So here's your wavetable. Let's give it some reverb. That reverb is not hitting the way I want it to. Let's adjust the reverb. Let's hold function, hit the amp page, and go into the reverb section. Here I'm going to turn up the reverb decay. That's really going to fix my reverb problem right now. Oh yeah. While we're talking about effects, let's go over to the delay and change that up. Let's make it a ping pong delay by turning the B encoder here and bring up the stereo width to its maximum so that it bounces from left to right entirely. We can turn this feedback up a bit too. Cool. There's that delay. It'd be really cool if there was an LFO that would modulate the waveform in my wavetable on that chord. Let's go to our LFO section. The LFO is a little complex, as it should be. It can do a lot, and you want it to be able to do a lot, so it being complex is a good thing. Let me tell you how it works. This is the speed or the frequency of your LFO, so your A encoder here, adjust the speed. This is going to be like a multiplier of your speed. You can have this synced to the BPM or not. This is the fade of your LFO, so this will allow the LFO to fade in and out. And then you have your destination. There's tons of destinations to choose from. Basically anything in these pages, minus the trig page. Doesn't really have anything that you can modulate with the LFO. And then over here is your waveform. There's a bunch of waveforms to choose from. And then this is the phase of your LFO. It's great that there's this nice animation to show that to you. And then we also have the mode of your LFO, and this is where things get a little bit more complex. So by default, it's in free running, so it just starts running once you start your project. There's just this LFO going in the background. And then this next mode here is the trig mode, so the LFO will reset its phase every time a trig that allows itself to reset the LFO's phase happens, which by default is all the trigs. The next one is hold, so that free running LFO, when a trigger happens, will sample the free running LFO and use that, so like a sample and hold. Then we have one, which will just do one cycle of your LFO. So if you're using something like this exponential wave to, I don't know, the filter frequency or something, you'd have a second envelope that you could use that would just cycle the one time with your filter. So it's useful. You can use it to do all sorts of things. I use the one mode in the LFO section on almost every sound. It's just, to have another envelope is really powerful. And then the very last one is half, and half is a little interesting. So if we have a waveform, I don't know, like this random waveform here, half will run through half of the waveform, and that's all it will use. So we'll just use half of what you got there. All right, so I'm gonna select the waveform and hit yes, and then let's modulate it. So we could use free running. I like using the trig mode, as I mentioned, and trig with random is really nice. So every time it hits, it's going to be a new timbre to our chord sound. We could filter those chords and make it kind of dubby. Now if I want to turn down this track, like those chord stabs, they're kind of loud. I can either turn down the volume, but it's best not to do that because I don't need to. The volume's really good for parameter locking certain steps with lower volume so that you can kind of add some dynamics to your sequence. Now the level data encoder over here, this is going to control the mix of this track. So this is the overall volume of your track. And you can see this in depth here. If you hold function and hit the LFO button, you can go into your mixer. So here's page 1 of 3 pages in your mixer. Like I said, function, LFO, mixer section. You can see here in red it says mixer. Anything in red on the Syntakt can be accessed via the function button. That's why this is big red button here. Now we can see that we adjusted that track because the volume's a little bit lower. And you can see all your tracks along with the effects track, the delay and the reverb independently. And then lastly, we have our incoming audio. So these balanced stereo inputs that we have over here can get processed here. So you can choose how much audio to bring in through the external audio. And you can also give it a send, use the delay and send some delay to it, send some reverb to it. And then you can also choose whether it's post or pre with the effects. Pretty useful, very cool. Okay, so we've gotten pretty far, and I'm pretty happy with where we are right now. But we're still playing at 120 BPM. That's kind of boring. So let's change the tempo. We can either adjust the tempo just by hitting this metronome button here and turning the level data encoder. That feels a little bit better. Or we can tap tempo in by holding function and hitting it 4 times. Let's bring it back to 133. Cool. Let's bring some more sounds into our sequence. So we can either select a track that we're not using, like we're not using track 7 right now, which is using the Bits engine. Happens to be one of my favorite engines so far. But we're gonna hit either the sound browser button, the level data encoder, you press down on it, and that will bring you into the sound browser, which you can audition sounds with function and yes. Whoa. And we want to find something melodic. I want some little plucks or something, because I like that kind of music. Now, to put digital sounds, you have to put them onto digital tracks, and analog sounds have to go on analog tracks. So when you actually select a sound, whether it's auditioning it or not, you're gonna have to make sure that you're selected on the correct track, and it will tell you, it's give you an error message if it can't load that sound onto that track. And it's just gonna let you know that's an analog sound, it's gotta go on an analog track, or vice versa with the digital. So We can search here if we want. We could filter it out and find something pretty. Here's synth. If I want to move to another bank, I can just select another bank down here. That works for me. Hit yes, so that was a digital preset, so it loaded right into the track. And it changed the engine to the chord engine, but it's using it in unison mode. That's why there's not any other notes. Let's go back into our nice quantized keyboard here and use this new preset sound. All right, live record. Let's make this track a little bit longer. So back into our page scaling, just hit page again. So what that's gonna do, it's gonna have doubled the trigger side put down in my sequence. You can see I have 2 pages of the same stuff. So I can either delete one of the pages just by, letting go of these sequences, or I can delete this whole track. So while I'm in this track and this record button is lit, I can go function and hit clear, and it will delete everything in that track, and it will leave my pattern alone and just delete the track. If I'm outside of record and I do that, I will delete the whole pattern. But also doing it again, so clearing your pattern again will unclear it and bring it back. So that's the only real safety measure you can do. So the other thing that you can do, and something you should get used to doing before you enter stuff or really make some wide adjustments to your patterns, is going function plus yes, and this will save to a temporary area. And this is really useful. So let me give you an example. Now, if I don't like that, or if I don't like maybe some crazy adjustments, and I do like those adjustments, but we're gonna delete them anyway. So if I go function no, I revert to that spot that I was in when I hit function yes. So really useful for live performance. So you can do some big adjustments and then just go right back to where you were. It doesn't reset the sequence or anything, it just keeps playing. So it's incredibly useful. Okay, so let's have another go at putting that melodic sequence in. Let's quantize that. Let's move this step over. I'll copy it, paste it here. Use an LFO to the panning. Now it's a little bit wider. Cool, I'm liking that so far. I want to talk about a few other things before we conclude this getting started tutorial, and one of them is something very unique to the Syntakt, and that is these trigger modifiers down here. This is something you're not going to find in any other Elektron box, or any other box that I know of, but definitely any other Elektron box. And I'm pretty excited to show it to you. So hold function and select one of these 4 tracks here. See, they have their interesting color. Find that color on any other box as well. And the first one is retrigger. And so if you hold function while you're still holding function and press the up arrow, you go into this modifier setup section. So to get into those 4 buttons, you got to make sure you hold function, select it, hit up to go into the modifiers so you can actually adjust their parameters. So right now, by default, they start with the trigger on, which is great. So, we gotta leave the keyboard. Remember that. So get out of the keyboard, function plus track to get out of there. And then we have these 4 different triggers now. So we have this highlighted, but we have access to these 4 parameters, and that's why they're in that box. These encoders are going to control these parameters. I'm going to select a snare drum to emphasize the retrigger, because snares work really well for this. So you can adjust the retrigger speed here. And this is going to be per pattern. So you can record these into your sequence, which is really cool. Let's check out another one. So here's velocity. So each one of these is going to be a different velocity. So this is really cool for recording like hi-hats in, or snares or kick drums. Well, anything. It's going to be great for recording all sorts of things in. So the next one is the modifier, and this is one of the more interesting ones. I think this and the retrigger are the most useful, although with the velocity one, you can go into your sound section, go to your sound setup, and go to your velocity modifier, and then you can send your velocity out to 4 different destinations. So you could make some really crazy sounds with that little combo. It's just a little tip. All right, let's get out of there. And so what this is 4 different parameters to 1 destination. You get 2 modifiers, 15 and 16 are the 2 different modifiers, and you just select a destination. You don't have as many destinations as the LFO because it has to be something that's available on every single machine. So only a few things are available on every machine. Yeah, that's gonna be like filter stuff, a few synth parameters, and some amplifier parameters, and maybe some effects and stuff like that. But not a ton of stuff, not everything from the LFO. But still really useful, and then you can play that stuff in. So if I select like a melodic sound, let's go here and put in a melodic engine. We'll go back to that bits engine that I like so much. Okay, back over to our modifier, and now I need to select the tune. Lo-fi tune. Pretty cool. So you can do that with many parameters, and then you can record that stuff into your sequence, which I'm not going to do right now because I'm just going to have to undo it anyway. Okay, so the last and final most needed thing to know is the effects track, and this is really cool. So hold function and select effects, and here's where you get to route your effects into the analog filter and just into the effects track in general, but most useful into the analog filter. So I can select all my tracks, and now I can hold track and select effects, and now I'm on the effects track as well. So changing these routings and being in the effects track are 2 different things. You have to keep that in mind. So let me go over to the filter section since we're in the effects section. It says effects track right there. Okay, so everything is running into my effects track, and now I'm gonna go into the filter here and just lower the filter. So you could use this in conjunction with the fill condition on your snare roll. And you have a bunch of different filters to choose from here. There's a low pass with a notch. Interesting. And you can sequence this. So I could put down a step here and bring the filter like way down, and then a step here where the filter's back up. That's pretty cool. So you can do this as well with the amplifier, or the amplifier menu here. So we could just run everything into the reverb at once, or into the delay. As you can see, this envelope is inverted because you have a few choices of envelopes. Press the amp menu to get into your secondary envelope choice. You're going to find these secondary envelope choices on most of the engines in the Syntakt. But you're not going to find inverted ones except for on the effects track, which is where we are now. So we can turn the depth up. We're kind of doing like ducking right now. Not very good ducking. It would take a little bit of time to dial this in. Also, we probably wouldn't want to run every track into this. Could maybe leave the kick out. That's not so bad. Still not great though. Let's go back. Clear that out. Okay, back to where we started. So something else that's really cool and you can only do on this track is in your LFO menu. So you have two LFOs and you can take these LFOs and route them to parts of the Syntakt that you couldn't do otherwise, like the delay time. So let's check that out. We go into the LFO and I'm gonna select delay time, turn that way up. You can hear it going nuts. Let me mute some of this stuff so you can really hear that. So that also brings up muting, which I guess I haven't gone over yet. So let's talk about that in just 1 second. So that's great. So you can design your own modulated delays and your own modulated reverbs, because both of those things can be targeted. You can also target this analog filter here and do some crazy filtering and make some really unique textures by just sending certain tracks into the analog filter, so that some things could actually technically have 4 filters, because some of the engines have a filter. Then there's 2 filters on the digital tracks or the digital synth engines, and then there's the analog filters. So technically 4 filters that you can process. So imagine what kind of sounds you can make with 4 filters. Quite a few. Quite a few weird sounds. I've already dived way deep into the weird side on this device, and it's a lot of fun. Okay, so I feel like that pretty much covers most of the effects engine here. There's also an analog drive that everything is run into. It's gonna be real crunchy when I turn it up. It's like a bit much, right? But you can dial that in by taste. It actually starts off your projects with the drive turned on. So here's it turned down. You can hear a lot of those harmonics, a little bit of distortion. There was a little bit of distortion. It's gone now. All right, let's check out the mute mode real quick. So if we hold function and hit bank, we can lock into the mute mode. These green mutes, these are global mutes. So if I go mute these 3 tracks, go to pattern 2, they're still muted. That's how global mute works. It's on a global level, so everything gets muted. It's useful, but even more useful, in my opinion, are these pattern mutes. So if you press function and bank quickly, a couple presses, you'll get into the purple mutes. These are per pattern. So now if I go to pattern 2, they're all unmuted. Back to pattern 1, those 3 tracks are muted again. So this is really great for preparing yourself to move to another pattern. You write a pattern, you copy the pattern, you paste it onto the next pattern, you mute some of the elements so that when you move to the next pattern, some of the elements aren't there, but all you have to do is unmute them while you're playing to bring them in. And of course you adjust that second pattern to make it different than the first one, but you can use that first pattern as kind of a foundation for building that pattern out. So to grow your pattern, as I was mentioning before, copying and pasting your pattern, this is what you would do. You just hold function and hit the record button. This will copy your pattern. Go to the next pattern, hold function and hit the stop button, and that's gonna paste your pattern. There's some crazy stuff in there because I was tinkering around before I recorded that for you. But this is how you would get started growing your song out, and how I recommend starting to make music. Take a pattern, copy it, make adjustments, copy it, make adjustments, copy it, make adjustments. Use your pattern mutes and play through. So I'm just gonna audition some of the engines that are in the Syntakt so you can hear them during this video, and then I'm gonna let you play on your Syntakt because I think you've been watching this for a while. So double pressed, I'm going to select a digital track, double press synth, and I'm just gonna audition the default engines here. Go out of the mute mode. And then of course there's the MIDI engine. Let's go over to the analog side and do that again. And lastly, let's look at those analog symbol engines. And cowbell. Pulse noise, pretty cool. Make a whole track with that little bugger. Last thing we need to do is save our project. Let's go function and hit the gear logo icon button and then hit yes on a blank spot and hold function and hit no. We're gonna delete that project and then press function again and select some letters. I'll go Matt, because that's me. And then hit yes, and boom. Your project's saved for recalling later. So there's many more functions and other things that you can do on the Syntakt, but none of them do you need immediately. That's stuff for digging in and fleshing out your pattern. So I think that this is enough to get you started with all the features that's gonna let you play with your Syntakt and get the most out of it right away. So I'm gonna leave you there. Again, I'm Matthew, aka EZBOT. If you're interested in supporting me, you can visit patreon.com/EZBOT. That's the best way to support me. Please join my Discord. There will be a link in the description or in the comments. Either way, you're super welcome. Love to have you. Let's talk about this box a lot together. Take care.